if you've got, say, 3 years of first-round picks, because I do think when you look at the best teams, you can just you go back the last 3 years and you say, how well did they draft? And most of the time, other than the Patriots who just traded away all their picks and Tom Brady still carries them, most teams drafted pretty well. They built this core roster, and they're a pretty good team.
They drafted a lot.
They drafted a lot.
They took advantage of the fact that
they drafted well. Look, I'm all for draft as many times as possible, and I agree, just so we know. What should the 49ers do? Trade down.
I just think we need to be careful when we say drafted well, because everyone basically just drafts.
I'm not saying
to a certain extent.
I'm not saying hit rate. Part of drafting well is drafting a lot. That's part of the strategy, right?
There we go.
So draft a lot, which means you'll get more players over time. I'm all for that. If you have 3 straight years and you've drafted an edge, nice marker, a DI, and a cornerback, versus corner, right? And let's say this is a hit, and then missed. Miss, hit. So I've got 3 straight years. Would you guys suggest? I can project these guys a little bit easier. So if I've got pretty good data on edges and DIs, I know I can draft good ones, right? So I can hit on these guys a little bit more. Cornerbacks, just hypothetically in this situation, I go miss, and hit. So I get a corner 1 out of 3 years, once in 3 years, versus I get an edge and a DI but no corner in 2 out of 3 years. In a vacuum, does that?
I think this defense is better in the long run, and only because again, like, the fact is like, you look at the cornerback market, you want to go out and get a cornerback. Like, let's say the edge and the DI there you're drafting are probably complemented by a corner in the free agent market. If you're going to get a corner in the free agent market, you're getting the Trumaine Johnsons of the world. You're getting the guys, the Nickel Roby-Colt. Like, you're getting the guys with something wrong with them, right? Whereas in the edge market, like, if you look at this year, a lot of those guys are being franchise tagged, but there's still guys that are like William Hayes is a guy who can play, right? And he's going to be cheap. The Patriots sort of like got lucky by getting Gilmore, but that cost them an arm and a leg. Like, I just think if you're looking at like draft versus free agency, I think that second defense is still projected to do better in year 3.
Well, and you've also got to think about, the stability continues at the NFL level. So an edge player and a defensive interior player more likely to continue their. So you're going to pay those guys, right? So now So I kind of want to take more swings at positions that I probably don't want to end up paying because I know of their volatility. Now, this is something that doesn't actually happen that much in the NFL because people feel like they need to reward players that have played well.
Well, we might need to change the game. We're trying to change the game here.
I would say the Patriots have done that pretty darn well, and they've been marginally successful
let guys
over the past
walk
few
and
years.
And refill.
So I think I see where you're coming from there. The other thing is you're scamming us a little bit. Because not only are the cornerbacks getting a far lower hit rate, but their hit is coming at the end of the draft. At the end of the
I don't
3
care
years,
where it. I don't care if it's here, right? I don't care. Doesn't matter. You've hit on.
That's the thing.
Even if you hit on this one, you hit on 1 out of 3.
The potential of hitting, 1 out of 3 still could happen in that first year, right? And
so even if it does that change at all?
Well,
because
you're better,
1 out of 3.
You're better for those 3 years,
well,
right?
because then you have more freedom to take the other positions in year 2 and 3. And not having us necessarily think it's a bad decision. Whereas if you go edge DI, your defense probably still isn't very good those 2 years, and then you have to need to take a cornerback. And I'm less like I'm
less worried about the order and more worried about, in this scenario I found 2 players in 3 years. In this scenario I found 1 in 3 years.
Because our thought process is, let's say you're the Eagles, right? And you go into a season, you had Patrick Robinson signed as a free agent, you could take a chance on him. Rasul Douglas, Sidney Jones in the same draft. Plus you trade for Ronald Darby. You have so much opportunity to like use those players in ways in which they're best used. And the issue is when your depth is bad at cornerback, you have to use guys in ways in which they're not comfortable.
You don't have to convince me of that.
Right.
I mean, I get it. I deal with this arguing with people on Twitter all the time. You just gave us a corner. We've got 2 corners. Thanks. I know you can never have too many coverage guys. I think with the Patriots using
they changed that rule this year.
You can't.
I was under the impression that you had a maximum of 3 corners.
2.5.
2.5.
And so here's the other
slowly
thing.
Getting there.
Here's the other thing. We're better at judging defensive linemen in pass rushing and run defense. So when the Carl Lawson slips to the 4th round, we're more likely to say this guy's going to be good, and draft him in the 4th round, if some guy goes to the 4th round as a corner, we're going to be less likely to say that's a long shot that's going to hit. So it's sort of like all around the draft as well. So like when a guy falls, we're going to be more Grady Jarrett, Trey Flowers.
Yep.
Those are other examples of guys
Shocking.
that we really like. I think we're better off hitting on those guys late and then shooting a lot of shots early.
This is the key point, right?
Yeah.
You guys can change my draft philosophy, which is ever evolving. I've always felt like hit rate matters, right? Everybody's attacked. Like if I hit on 75% of my players, you're way above average. Like you want to hit on players, and I completely agree. Draft as much as possible because your hit rate is tough to predict. But if you're telling me that my hit rate doesn't matter as much because we can run some math essentially on the positional value, right? And say, if I'm going to draft 7 corners, I only need to hit on 3. If I hit on 3 out of 7,
that's the point.
You're winning.
And you're assuming that you have all of your picks throughout the draft. The point that Eric makes is exactly the reason you do this, which is that your confidence in edge and defensive interior players doesn't end right after the 1st round. It stays there. And so
there's just generally fewer of those guys available because we're good at predicting them. The NFL's generally pretty good at predicting them too. A lot of the best edge defenders in the NFL, they usually show up in the 1st round.
Yeah.
But it's a good point I hadn't thought of before. If we are confident in predicting these guys, we're still confident in predicting them in the 3rd and 4th round. Maybe you find a few gems or guys that are at least good enough.
Well, you only need 1 or 2, right? That's the other thing, right? You only need a couple of those guys.
And a good scheme. Like, and as we get better at contextually, like sort of deriving some of these rankings, like if you're a team and you think you're good at predicting not only this player, how good he's going to be fundamentally, but also how good he is in your scheme, like you're going to be more willing to shoot your shots at the beginning of the draft and then go 4th and 5th round and be like, okay, this is what everybody has as a 6th round prospect. In our minds, he's the 5th round, so we'll get him at the beginning of the 6th, and it's still going to be a value. And like, I think it's easier to do that with positions like edge, offensive line, defensive interior than it is corner, I think.
You're going to change the game on draft strategy.
Well, really, we're just going to get a ton of hate about people saying that we're wrong at first, but eventually,
I can't wait to see your draft board, which is like QB, 17 corners, QB,
punter, running back.
There's no chance I'm doing everything I can to get out of the top 5 unless I'm drafting a quarterback. So I can't imagine using a top 5 pick on someone other than a quarterback.